All right, let's jump right into this explainer. Today we're unpacking what is basically the ultimate cheat code for research success, transforming a vague idea into a razor-sharp research problem. If you've ever felt completely overwhelmed at the start of a project, just staring blankly at a page or a massive mountain of data, it's almost always because the problem itself just hasn't been properly defined. So today, we're going to walk through the precise systematic funnel that takes a broad, clunky thought and refines it down to something that is actually operationally testable. We're kicking things off with this incredibly powerful truth straight from the source text. A problem clearly stated is a problem half solved. Now, this isn't just some catch-it phrase, right? It's really a warning. Defining your boundaries early on is literally the only way to separate the gold from the noise. Without that definition, you're absolutely going to get lost in a sea of information later. In fact, formulating the problem is often way more essential than the research design itself. So, here is our roadmap for the explainer today. First, the anatomy of a problem. Second, selecting your subject. Third, the 5-step technique. And finally, an illustration in practice. Okay, let's get into section 1, anatomy of a problem. What makes a problem actually solvable? Well, according to the material, a problem technically only exists if it hits these 5 specific conditions. First, you need an individual or a group facing an actual difficulty. Second, you need an objective you're trying to hit. Third, you must have at least 2 alternative courses of action to reach that objective. Fourth, there has to be actual doubt in your mind about which course is best. And finally, all this has to take place within a specific environment. The absolute crucial point here is this: your choices cannot all have the exact same outcome. Think about it. If choosing path A and path B both yield the exact same result, your choice literally doesn't matter, which means you don't actually have a research problem to solve. Moving right along to section 2, selecting your subject, which is really all about the filtering process. The text uses this really brilliant optician analogy for this phase. Think about it. If your eyes need glasses, the optician doesn't just arbitrarily decide your prescription, right? You have to cooperate and tell them what you're seeing. It's the exact same for a researcher. You can't just borrow a problem from a guide or a professor. A problem has to spring from your own mind. A guide can help steer you, for sure, but ultimately, the researcher has to find their own salvation. Now, when you're filtering potential subjects, there are a few major traps you definitely want to avoid. First, skip the overdone subjects. It's incredibly difficult to throw any new light on them. Second, controversial subjects are generally way too risky for the average researcher. And of course, subjects that are either way too narrow or completely vague simply aren't going to give you the traction you need to conduct any meaningful analysis. But hey, we also have to face the practical reality of research. Before you go finalizing your subject choice, you have to ask yourself these somewhat harsh feasibility questions. Are you actually equipped with the background to pull this off? Does the study fall within a budget you can realistically afford? And crucially, can you actually get the necessary cooperation from the subjects who need to participate? Because if the answer to any of those is no, well, your problem isn't practical, no matter how amazing it sounds on paper. All right, on to section 3, the 5-step technique for refining the problem. Let's look at how this builds sequentially. The technique involves 5 steps: stating the problem generally, understanding its nature, surveying the literature, discussing your ideas, and finally, rephrasing the proposition. This whole sequence is expertly designed to resolve those messy ambiguities through cool, calculated rethinking. Step 1 is stating the problem in a really broad, general way, usually based on some practical concern or scientific interest. And to do this effectively, you have to completely immerse yourself in the subject matter. Often, this means doing a pilot survey. Basically, this is a preliminary field observation that helps you get a feel for the landscape. Now, your initial statement is probably going to be full of ambiguities, but honestly, that's perfectly okay at this stage. The pilot survey gives you the baseline you need to start ironing them out. Moving to step 2, you need to understand the true nature of the problem. And the best method for doing this is surprisingly simple. Trace its origins. You should be actively discussing the issue with the exact people who first raised it. Find out how the problem originally came about and what objectives were in view at the time. Getting a grip on the root environment of the problem is absolutely essential before you even try to solve it. Step 3, the literature survey. Now, this isn't just reading for the sake of reading. You have very specific goals here. You're looking for existing data to see if your problem is operational. You're actively hunting for gaps in existing theories or spotting inconsistencies across different studies. But most importantly, you're looking for past analytical shortcomings so you don't end up making the exact same mistakes. This step ensures you are building upward from existing premises rather than just reinventing the wheel. Step 4 is all about developing your ideas through discussion, what the text actually calls an experience survey. This just means talking through your proposed problem with colleagues or experts who have rich, hands-on experience in that specific field. These people are invaluable. They can sharpen your focus, point out specific techniques you might use, and even hint at possible solutions you hadn't even considered yet. And finally, we hit step 5. Once you've understood the nature, surveyed the literature, and talked to the experts, your final task is to sit down and rephrase that initial clunky problem into a tight working proposition. You have to translate it into specific operational terms so it can actually be tested. This right here is what paves the way for developing your working hypotheses.
Let's look at section 4, an illustration in practice, seeing the refinement funnel in action.
Check out our starting point over on the left. Why is productivity in Japan so much higher than in India? At first glance, you might think, hey, great research topic. But as we see on the right, it is plagued by massive ambiguities. What sort of productivity are we even talking about? Labor? Capital? In what specific industries? And during what exact time period? In this form, the question is just way too general to handle any real analysis. So, we run it through our rethinking process. Notice how much better the right side is now. Instead of just general productivity, we specify labor productivity. Instead of looking at the whole economy, we dial it into manufacturing industries, and we tack on a precise decade, 1971 to 1980. This is a massive leap forward. The ambiguities are fading fast, but we can still get it sharper. And boom, here brilliantly illustrates the final operational version. Look at the precision on this. To what extent did labor productivity in 1971 to 1980 in Japan exceed that of India in respect of 15 selected manufacturing industries? We've narrowed the whole thing down to a specific number of industries, which makes the data collection highly targeted and actually manageable. This proposition is analytically meaningful and totally ready for testing. Now, as you lock in your own final problem statement, the text gives us this essential checklist to make sure you haven't missed anything. You gotta clearly define all technical terms. State any basic assumptions you're making up front. Provide a clear statement on the value of the investigation, like why does this even matter? Verify your time period and data sources. And lastly, you must explicitly state the scope and the absolute limits of the investigation. As the chapter wraps up, it really reinforces that we're applying a very strict sequential pattern here. You state it generally, you actively resolve those ambiguities, and through thinking and rethinking, you arrive at a highly specific formulation. A well-defined problem isn't just some academic hurdle to clear. It's a vital tool that literally paves the way for your hypotheses and the actual solution to the problem itself. So I'm going to leave you with this final thought to evaluate your own work. Look at your current projects and ask yourself, is your research problem actually operationally viable, with clear boundaries and measurable limits? Or is it really just a broad complaint wrapped up in fancy academic language? Remember, the sharper your problem, the clearer your solution is going to be. Keep refining, and I'll see you next time.